Dr. Uday S. Kulkarni, Surgeon Commander, Indian Navy retired and historian. He will make a presentation on why and how India became a British colony.
Good afternoon to you all. It is a pleasure to be back and speak on a subject that is familiar, yet one that many are not very well informed of. The victors always write history, and in English, for close to 100 years, we have digested the history written by the white man. Even today, we have not quite escaped this, as more of them are telling us our history as they see it. And it continues to be misinterpreted and repackaged for the rest of the world. We have also had another model to contend with, that was the Aligarh school. And then there is another school of scholars in the US who are, for example, telling us how good a man a ruler like Aurangzeb was. So the topic we are speaking on today is therefore simple, yet there are many ways of looking at it. India became a colony of a small island many thousands of miles away. How did this happen? It was difficult then, and it's difficult to imagine now. India was not quite conquered like Napoleon conquered Europe or the Blitzkrieg in the Second World War. A nation like India can never be conquered at one stroke. More important, it cannot be conquered without our cooperation. So while we discuss this, I hope I can also set the record straight here. There has been much talk of a corporate entity and a company taking over India. However, we shall see in the course of my talk that that is not the case. In my first book, which I wrote in 2011, I had written that a young boy growing up in the British Isles today would find it fascinating that his small nation with rudimentary communication could overwhelm an ancient civilization, fight and win wars several thousand miles away, and establish an empire that lasted nearly 150 years. Unquote. Equally, a boy in 21st century India, surging towards the top place in the world, wonders how she was ruled by a small distant island. And the topic we address today, therefore, is timely. In 1803, just at the start of the 19th century, when the English or the British overcame the Marathas in the Second Anglo-Maratha War and took over the mantle of being the de facto rulers of India. The British took over India from the Marathas, not the Mughals. It is necessary not to be diverted by the romanticized version of Bahadur Shah Zafar. The phantom of the Red Fort was propelled to national consciousness in 1857, while Tatya Tope, Nana Sahib and Rao Sahib Peshwa and Rani Lakshmibai did most of the heavy lifting. Ultimately, Britain was going through an industrial revolution, and it wanted the huge Indian market. They wanted to make laws favorable to themselves, and therefore the aim was always political power. They also wanted India's huge accumulated wealth. In Pune in 1818, for example, after the Third Anglo-Maratha War, they did not even spare the wooden houses and palaces of the nobles. Even timber was plundered and sold. That's why you don't see any monuments left in Pune today. And to quote just one report from the Times of India in 1858, just after the First War, a single princely state of Kirvi near Banda yielded treasure that can only be described from the original report. The Times of India says, and I quote, a company of the 43rd Madras Native Infantry found 140 cartloads of gold bricks and nuggets and 40 lakhs of rupees. And more was expected to be discovered. Besides these, an immense quantity of jewels have also been found. Now this was known as the Banda Kirvi Booty, and it was fought over in British courts for several years after that. So we have lost wealth, but we have lost something much more. We lost our cultural moorings. These had to be wrested back. These were wrested back in the 17th and 18th century, over 150 years during the Maratha period, when they had a cultural renaissance. Now of this I will speak somewhere else. And yet, and surprisingly so, if you read and listen, you will discover that the India of late 18th century, when we went under the British once again, it had reached a moral low. It was a time when the nation needed to emerge from a morass of its own making. And therefore, any story that I am going to tell you today, it's best when told from the beginning. And so in the limited time we have, let us tell that story. So, how did it begin? In the 13th century, you can say, bit by bit, parts of India began to go under foreign rule. Turks, Persians, Afghan invasions, they came in waves. India was not a united force, there were small rajas spread out all over. There were some from time to time, Chakravarti rajas as they were called, and they held the whole country together, but rarely for longer than a couple of decades. The Turco-Persian Afghan invasions actually changed the complexion of India. And though there was a bulwark of the Vijayanagara kingdom which came after that, like 1311, 1314, 1321, you find large armies of the Deccan Sultanates coming in this very area. Yesterday I was in the temple of Gangaikonda in Cholapuram, and I found that all the temples there were destroyed during those three invasions in the early 14th century. And it was only Vijayanagar, which came later in that century, that rebuilt many of the structures. In fact, the present temple largely has been restored by the Vijayanagar kingdom. So it was a bulwark for almost 200 years in the south, and therefore the south of the Tungabhadra, you find much of Indian culture was preserved for a fairly long time. But it was not long after that that the Mughals reached south of the Vindhyas, and their oppression, their loot, their economic exploitation, their religious persecution, there was bound to be reaction, and that reaction finally came. And the most successful of the reactions was in Maharashtra with the arrival of Chhatrapati Shivaji. It was in 1647 that this young man, all of 16 years, began to fight for his own rule or Swarajya. He challenged the Bijapur Sultan. From here, the road to sovereignty was a mix of strength, guile, diplomacy and courage, great personal courage. In 1659, in a 1-to-1 combat, he killed the powerful Afzal Khan of Bijapur. In 1663, he led a small group of men to attack the Mughal Subedar of the Deccan, Shaista Khan, in his own house and cut off 4 of his fingers. Next year, he looted the pride of the Mughals, Surat. Why did he loot Surat? To paraphrase the stand, as in one English letter mentions it, if your king makes war on my people, I will use the money I get from you to wage this war, because this war has been forced on us. He has come down to invade me. In 1666, he was compelled by Mirza Raja Jai Singh of Jaipur to surrender some of his forts and visit Aurangzeb at Agra. Here he was placed under house arrest. His escape from here is the stuff of folklore. In 1670, he took the battle to the Mughals once again, just after they had demolished the Kashi Vishwanath temple. Fort after fort was recaptured. He was crowned Chhatrapati, a first coronation indigenous king after more than 100 years. He held an umbrella, a royal parasol over his head, signifying that he will protect his people, and that's why he was given the title of Chhatrapati. In 1677, he went south, he overawed the Sultan of Golconda. He went down all the way, he took the fort of Jinji and vastly expanded and rebuilt and strengthened it, which helped him in good stead in the years to come. He kept his own governors in that region. The work done by this one man is truly astonishing. He awakened people, protected and cared for them, and engineered a cultural renaissance. However, today our subject is going to be beyond this period. So I'm just giving a background of what happened, how the English actually began to grow. At this time in the 17th century, the conflict was mainly between the Mughals and the Marathas, and the English were mere bystanders. They were attacked in Surat, they defended themselves. Surat was being repeatedly attacked by the Mughals also. Bombay came into their hands. So in 1660s they shifted to Bombay and so on. Now, in a watershed in our history was, after a 25-year-long war with the Marathas, Aurangzeb died in the Deccan in 1707. He left his capital in 1681. He never went back to his capital after that. He kept fighting with the Marathas, the Bijapur Sultan and the Golconda. So when he died, he knew he's lost the battle and his empire is collapsing. And the Marathas by that time were already leaping beyond the Narmada. Delhi was always the aim. The Marathas always said that they wanted to take Delhi. Now, Chhatrapati Rajaram, when he was under a siege at the fort of Jinji for 8 long years, he was writing a letter to his Sardars. I quote, "Recognizing your aim to preserve the Maharashtra Dharma, we have placed a reserve of 6 lakh hone." Hone was a coin at that time, it is a currency, on capture of Raigad, which was the capital of the Marathas, Bijapur, Bhavanagar, which was Hyderabad, and Aurangabad, a sum of 750,000 lakh per territory amounting 3 lakh home will be distributed. And then he goes on to say, the remaining 3 lakh will be dispersed on taking Delhi. So this was in 1690s when he was still far in the south, when he still was talking of taking Delhi. Now the continuous war of 25 years actually destroyed the Maratha constitution as conceptualized and created by the first two of their Chhatrapatis. The quest for Watans which Aurangzeb offered the Marathas, and that was a genie which could not be put back into the bottle, it had to be offered by the Marathas also. In 1708, after Aurangzeb's death, his Shivaji Maharaj's grandson Shahu was released, and the purpose of releasing him was very simple, that you have to create a divide in the Marathas, and to this day you find there are two Maratha states in Satara as well as Kolhapur, so he did succeed in that venture. Here you see the fort of Jinji, one of the forts inside Jinji, and which I'll be visiting tomorrow. Now, next we come to 1708, and Shahu, when he came to the south, he was in Mughal prison for 18 long years. He was never trained to be a soldier, and therefore increasingly he had to depend on his generals. And of these people who were supporting him, one very loyal and efficient minister was Balaji Vishwanath, who was extremely loyal to him. And in 1713, when Kanoji Angre came charging up the western Ghats to attack Satara, you find that, and in fact the earlier Peshwa was imprisoned and taken away by Kanoji Angre. It was Balaji Vishwanath who went, met Kanoji Angre, had an agreement with him and brought him over to Shahu's side. So that was the time when the period 1713, when you can actually say what is today called the Peshwai, actually began from that date in 1713 when he was appointed the Peshwa. And the Peshwas are roughly parallel, to give an international parallel to this, were like the shoguns of Japan, who were the military commanders of the Emperor of Japan, but who wielded the real power. So that power was increasingly handed over to the Peshwas by the Chhatrapati in the years to come. But the genie of federalism which had started and the lure of fiefs, own fiefdoms, could not be put away. So Balaji Vishwanath decided to exploit that, and he told his chiefs that you will all go out and capture new territories, and whatever new territory you capture will be given to you, and you will accept the sovereignty of the Chhatrapati Shahu. And that helped to get a faster growth of the empire. You find Gujarat, Malwa, Bundelkhand, the south chiefs going out because there was a personal motive in capturing these forts. Now what happened in the English? As we saw, Bombay was given to the English by the Portuguese governor, and let me stop working. And from there they began to, in the 17th century Bombay was very weak, and therefore when 1715 came up, the governor Charles Boone came into that area, and Charles Boone actually was the man who decided that I'm going to strengthen the fort of Bombay, make it stronger and ensure that it is well defended from any invaders. Because Siddhi of Janjira had invaded them. The Mughal ships used to come and invade them anytime. During Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, there were several battles. For example, the fort of Khandei, which is at the mouth of Bombay harbour, that was built by Shivaji. The English tried to displace him, they failed. Before that, the English had supported his enemies, so he went and punished them at their factory at Rajapur. So these things had happened at that time. And so they were, when Boone strengthened Bombay, he also called the Royal Navy to come and help him. So this myth of the company doing everything, you will find repeatedly in the 18th century laid bare as completely fake, because the British Navy, the Royal Navy and the British Army repeatedly came to the help of the East India Company. In fact, the King of England was a shareholder of the East India Company, and it was a creature of the British Parliament. And repeatedly you find the main Royal Navy, which was at that time one of the strongest navies in the world, they come down here with the first line of ships here to defend their holdings over here. Now what happened in 1721-22 was followed by, you have to jump almost, let me go back, almost 15 years ahead to 1737. The Portuguese were a major power north of Bombay, and they had been well entrenched for almost 200 years over there. The difference between the Portuguese and the English was that the Portuguese indulged in religious persecution. The Inquisition is one example of that. And therefore, a lot of complaints used to come to the Maratha king and the Peshwa that you must do something about this. And therefore, in 1737, Bajirao's younger brother, Chimaji Appa, led a large army and he first took the island of Salsette. If anybody's been to Bombay, it's the area from Bandra northwards. That entire island was taken by him. And he followed it up in 1739 by taking the fort of Vasai, which was a very strong Portuguese fort. In between, Bajirao himself, for the first time in 180 years, you find an enemy at the door of Delhi. When the Marathas charged at Delhi in 1737, he defeated a Mughal army on the outskirts of Delhi at Tal Katora. That is the place where the battle was fought. And that was the first shock that the Mughals got, that an army from the south comes up here and hits us at our doors. So they sent the Nizam down to fight with Bajirao, and a battle took place in 1738 at Bhopal, where the Nizam was defeated for a second time. He had been defeated once earlier in 1728 too. 1740, Bajirao and his son, brother Chimaji Appa, very young age, 35, 40 years of age, you find they have passed away. But before that, the English were worried that at Bandra, just across Mahim Creek, you find the Marathas are there, and are they planning to come and attack Bombay next? So they sent two of their wakils to Pune to find out what is the matter and what is it that they can do about this. Now this map actually shows you where, which are the parts of this main thing over here, the small thing here is the main city, island of Bombay. This part to its north. Now this map is, in those days, was east on the top and west at the bottom. That's the way Indian Maratha maps were drawn. It was not a north-south orientation. So you look at the map with a turn on its side. And the ships which are seen in the Arabian Sea. So these are islands around Bombay, and all these islands were taken over by the Marathas, and the small bit over here which you can see, which is Bombay, was actually under the British, and they were worried that are we next after the Portuguese? So they sent two wakils to Pune to meet the Peshwa and to meet the king to find out what is happening. But since the English were not indulging in religious persecution, the Marathas were not interested in attacking Bombay. In fact, they looked upon the English as facilitators of trade and export of goods from the hinterland, which was a very profitable enterprise for everybody. So they never bothered with the English at that stage, and therefore they were allowed to remain. In 1740, when both Bajirao and Chimaji died, Bajirao's son, who was not yet 19, not yet 20, was appointed the next Peshwa by Shahu. Shahu was a strong believer in hereditary succession, so he appointed Nana Sahib as the next Peshwa. And a new era dawns on India in 1740. You cannot believe the drastic change that takes place in just 1 year after 1739. Nadir Shah, in fact, 1739 comes and completely destroys what is left of the Mughal crown. And these three men, between 1740 and 1760, were the key to that period. So, what happened? The whole thing started in this area, in the Coromandel coast, because the Nawab of Arcot, his son and his son-in-law, were very ambitious people, and they decided that they must take the Tanjavur, which is a very rich area, very fertile plain, and they must take the fort of Tiruchirappalli. So they both went down, attacked these places and captured them. Tanjavur, having an association with the Marathas, the Marathas were bound to send an army south. And in 1740, when Bajirao was not well, you find a huge army being led by Raghuji Bhosle of Nagpur to the south. So 40,000 strong soldiers came down here, and the place here called Damal Cheru, if anybody of you knows it, that's the entry into Tamil Nadu of today. And at that pass, the battle takes place in the Nawab of Arcot, Dostali. He is killed. They come down further, they capture Arcot, they free Tanjavur from and the two son and son-in-law, they are held up in Vellore, and one is held up in Tiruchirappalli. So they go down further. Within 3 months, Tiruchirappalli is conquered. Chanda Sahib, who is son-in-law of the Nawab, is taken prisoner, taken back to Nagpur. And on the way, all the Arcot Nawab's treasures are sent into Pondicherry. Because Pondicherry got a very strong fort. Duma was the governor at that time, and they all came, the family members, the treasures, they all poured into Pondicherry at that time. And the Marathas sent him a message that you please hand over the treasures and please hand over the family members of this man whom we have defeated, who has opened a war against us, to which Duma refused. And this negotiation was going on when Duma thought that let me give them a gift. and he gave them 10 bottles of Moselle wine. And that wine reached Raghuji Bhosle, and Raghuji Bhosle's wife, or some places mentioned mistress, she loved that wine. And that kind of settled matters, and Pondicherry left alone by the Marathas, who retreated from there. And Raghuji Bhosle, when he went back to Nagpur, another event took place in Bengal. In Bengal, Murshid Quli Khan's dynasty, which was ruling from say 1708 to 1740, his grandson was there at Nawab at that time, Sarfaraz Khan. And one of his servants, who was the governor of Bihar, Alivardi Khan, he came down, and the place called Geria in the Rajmahal Hills, where they had a battle, and this Sarfaraz Khan was killed by Alivardi, and Alivardi became the usurper, as one author describes him, and he became the Nawab of Bengal. So many people who were with the former Nawab's family, they came running to Nagpur. Prominent among them was a man called Mir Habib. He came to Raghuji Bhosle and said, now you must come to Bengal and punish this usurper Alivardi Khan. And that led to the Marathas entering Orissa and Bengal. Orissa they took, and Orissa was a few feeble attempts by Alivardi to take it back, did not succeed. So Orissa remained a Maratha state till almost 1803. And they said to Alivardi Khan that you are an usurper, you have taken somebody else's land. So you have to pay us 12 lakh rupees a year as chowth, as a kind of a penalty, and we will go away, which Alivardi Khan refused to pay. And for 10 long years, the battle between the Marathas and Alivardi Khan continued until in 1751, Alivardi Khan ceded this demand and agreed to pay 12 lakh rupees a year to the Marathas. And after the Marathas did not come, because from 1751 to 1757, every year the 12 lakh rupees was being paid to the Nagpur Bhosles. Of course, all those, I'm sure you remember all the poetries of the Bargis of Bengal, but more on that a little later. So this was what was happening in Bengal at that time. Now, at the same time, after Duma left, another man came who completely changed Indian politics, and that man was Dupleix. The beautiful statue on the beach road. So this man came from Chandannagar to Pondicherry in 1742, and for 12 long years he was governor over here. And actually his work was not appreciated and understood by his own king in Paris. And therefore all the hard work he had done was actually undone. So what did he do? When he came in 1742, he started exploring what the situation was like. He found there a lot of rivalries going on amongst these people. And English had Madras, and the French had Pondicherry, and English also had Fort St. John, which is near Cuddalore. So Dupleix had ambitions of, because there was a trade war between these two European powers, he had to get rid of the English if he had to get a monopoly on the trade in this area. All the weavers who used to weave textiles which were exported, so Dupleix's interest was in trade. So Anwaruddin Khan, who was the Nawab of Arcot at that time, he prohibited Dupleix from attacking the English at Madras. Dupleix disobeyed the Nawab, attacked Madras and captured it and threw the English out from Madras. This was around 1746, and the English were only left in a small place in Fort St. John. It's a very small fort. And when Anwaruddin Khan found that he has been disobeyed by Dupleix, he was furious. And his second son, called his name was Mahfuz Khan, he didn't remain so Mahfuz after the battle. 30,000 soldiers were sent down to punish the French. The French had recently received a consignment of rapidly reloading guns from France. So they came out of Madras, about few hundred soldiers kept their guns there, and 30,000 people from across the river Adyar and started attacking the fort. As the cavalry charge came closer, they fired out their first shot. Now the usual trend was that before the second shot was fired, the cavalry used to reach the artillery and cut off the heads of the guys who were manning the guns. To their surprise, they found the guns reloaded so fast that another volley was set off. And that took these people by surprise, because front people all cut down by the firing, and they turned tail and ran away. When Dupleix saw this, he realized that his weapons and his techniques of battle are far superior to 30,000 Oriental armies. And that victory in 1746 set Dupleix on his ambitions of, if you read his letters, beautiful 1,000-page book written in 1733, translated to English by one American author. His letters speak of his ambitions to capture Bengal, He wants to defeat the Marathas. He wants to take Delhi. He wants to establish an empire of France and India. So all these things were going on. The Nizam died and his sons were fighting with each other. So Dupleix sent his general, Bussy, to actually take control of the Nizam's kingdom. He did take control of the Nizam's kingdom, and you find that the English are pushed into a corner. They have no weapons, they don't have an army worth its name, and the French are just rampaging all over the colonial coast. At that time, one of Anwaruddin Khan's sons, Muhammad Ali Alija as is called, he holed up in the fort of Trichinopoli, which had been captured from the Marathas some time earlier. And the French laid a siege around Trichinopoli, which went on for a very long time. Now, Muhammad Ali, everything else was with the French. So Muhammad Ali suggested to the English that you should make a diversionary attack on the Arcot fort, which is with the French. And there's a very small force over there. So next thing you know is in 1743, in fact, there was another man who had come to a reckless, suicidal man with very dangerous kind of tendencies. He was known to even try to shoot himself with a gun. The bullet was not there in the chamber, so he escaped right here in Madras. So this man, his name was Robert Clive. In fact, on his way to India, over an 18-month period, his ship was shipwrecked. It was once swept away by the winds all the way to Brazil. And after 18 long months, this guy lands up in Madras as a clerk. And when it was suggested that they should go and attack Arcot, the man who put up his hand and said, I will do it, was Robert Clive. And therefore, Robert Clive takes his army and heads towards Arcot. The small French force there is taken by surprise, quickly captures Arcot. But the French are respond quickly by sending a much larger force to attack Arcot. And Clive holds them off for 50 long days. So the siege of Arcot, 50 long days, was what actually created the legend of Clive. There is another legend just north of Srirangam. There is a place called Samayapuram where there is a temple. Clive just walked into the temple and found that it was under the French. So he bluffed his way. He spoke French and bluffed his way that he was a French commander. And till his English forces came and they arrested all the Frenchmen there. So he was that kind of a person. So he actually took Arcot, and from there the legend of Clive actually began. Later on, Nizam's kingdom was taken over by the French. Trichinopoli remained in English hands. So this problem continued for some more time. And in between, Clive went back to England for his. He wanted to be a member of Parliament. He spent a lot of money for that and so on. During that time, Dupleix was recalled by the King of England in 1754, and with the departure of Dupleix, the French ambitions of taking over anything in India disappeared, because 3 years later, to save Pondicherry from an English attack, Bussy, who was with the Nizam, was also recalled, and that ended the French influence in the Deccan. And the English from there onwards were resurgent, but not immediately, because there were pictures of Trichinopoli Fort, the Arcot Fort, what's left of it, and of course Fort St. George of Madras. So there is an aphorism which is mentioned that if there was no Dupleix, there would be no Clive. Because actually the French taught the English how to expand their empire, and that's why they say that it was Dupleix who actually taught by his actions. And with Bussy's withdrawal, the French power in the south was actually at its end. Now, two things happened. The English were not doing too well. Clive had gone back to London, and the Marathas were afraid of the French, because the Nizam was an enemy of the Marathas, supported by the French army. So they thought, let's have an alliance with the English to counter the French. So they had an alliance with the English. The English came with 5 ships of the Royal Navy to India in 1754, and Colonel Robert Clive, he was given an honorary rank. He also accompanied the British Army. Again, the Royal Navy and the British Army came here. When they came here in 1754, they said that we are friends with the French now, we don't need your help against them. But another matter, which is about the fort of Vijaydurg, which is on the western coast, because that was held by a Maratha naval commander called Toyaji Angre, who would not obey the orders of the Peshwa. Chhatrapati Shahu expired in 1749, he had no son, so the power actually shifted to the Prime Minister or the Peshwa. So he would not accept the commands of the Peshwa, and therefore Nana Sahib Peshwa thought that they could not take Vijaydurg purely by land army. They had to get help from the sea. So they tied up with the English that let you come from the sea and we'll come from the land. We'll take Vijaydurg. They did that. Vijaydurg was taken as a prisoner by the Peshwa, and Vijaydurg was also handed over a few months later by the English. Now, when this happened, around the same time, Ali Vardi Khan died in Bengal. The whole history of India is so interconnected actually. Ali Vardi Khan, before he died, he told his favorite grandson, Siraj-ud-Dawla, do not disturb the English. They are like a beehive. If you disturb them, they'll all sting you. Of course, Siraj-ud-Dawla, being an immature young man, did not accept his grandfather's advice. And in 1757, when the defenses of Calcutta were being raised by the English, he said that you are not allowed to do that. And for that reason, he attacked Calcutta, defeated the French, defeated the English, and threw them out of Calcutta. Of course, the legend of the so-called legend of the black hole was also created to give moral justification to the English to come back and attack Calcutta. Now, Clive and Watson, who was the naval commander, Rear Admiral Watson, had just come to Madras after finishing the Vijaydurg affair when Calcutta was taken by Siraj-ud-Dawla. So the next mission was to go up the Hooghly and attack Calcutta. So they reached there, and it was the Royal Navy ships' guns which actually completely overawed the Nawab, and he had to hand over Calcutta back to the English. That happened in January 1757. But Clive was not happy with that. He wanted the whole of Bengal. So he tied up with Mir Jafar, saying that you must come over to my side, I will make you the Nawab. Now this tableau which you see here is actually in the Westminster Abbey in London. And in the center you see Admiral Watson standing. On one side, the man who's with his hands tied behind his back is Tuyaji Angre, who has been, Vijaydurg has been taken. And on the other side, you see this damsel, which is supposed to personify Calcutta. They are both seeking help from Admiral Watson, and he is supporting them. So this entire tableau has been raised in the Westminster Abbey in London, which anybody can go and see. Now, all these things were happening, and Clive decided that I'm not going to be satisfied, so he recruited Mir Jafar. But Mir Jafar kept a studied silence till the night before the Battle of Plassey. If you see the geography of Bengal, opposite Plassey is a place called Katwa. And Clive was at Katwa the previous night. And he was wondering, should I go ahead? Will Mir Jafar desert his master and come over to my side in June 1757 when the battle was about to be fought? In fact, there was a letter written by Clive to the Calcutta Council where he says, shall I call the Marathas to help me? Because Nana Sahib Peshwa always had his eye on Bengal. In fact, there is a letter, an English translation of a letter written by Nana Sahib Peshwa to Clive, that if you want to defeat the Nawab, I will send you 40,000 Marathas and you can defeat the Nawab and capture Bengal. The idea being with 40,000 troops of his own, he will eventually take it out of the English hands and keep it for himself. Which Clive was in a, because he had not heard from Mir Jafar, he wrote to the Calcutta Council, what should I do? So eventually Mir Jafar late at night wrote to Clive that yes, I am coming the next morning. So he crossed the river that night and went across to Plassey. He kept his powder dry, as is famously known, and won the Battle of Plassey. It was a fixed match which he won. And actually it is no big deal, though in history today it is made out as the English Empire started with Plassey. It was no big deal, it was a very small battle, fixed battle that too. So, and the next day Mir Jafar came, this picture shows Mir Jafar coming and meeting Clive on the right side. So all these things were happening, Calcutta, Plassey took place, and that's how the English actually took the eastern part of India. When the English were fighting the Battle of Plassey, Ahmad Shah Abdali was invading India. In fact, the maximum loot after Nadir Shah, which was taken from India, was in 1757 when Ahmad Shah Abdali came to Delhi. 5 years before that, the Marathas had undertaken to protect the emperor at Delhi and protect Delhi from all invasions of Ahmad Shah Abdali. 1757 was the fourth invasion of Abdali. He came, looted Delhi. The Marathas had a very small army of 5,000 people who were defeated. And he not only did that, but his commander told him, you must go south, go to Mathura and Vrindavan, where there are a lot of sadhus, bairagis, pilgrims. And so he went down there. And one contemporary chronicler describes that he played holy with the blood of these pilgrims. For every head cut off, so many rupees were paid.
And the sannyasis of Vrindavan actually tried to fight back with him at that stage. And it is said that the Jamuna, because of the bloodshed, actually ran red for some days. And with the summer approaching, he did not like to stay here that time. There's an outbreak of cholera in his camp, and therefore he had to return back to Afghanistan. When he went, he left Najib-ud-Dawla in charge of Delhi. And the Marathas had gathered their army by the time. They went to Delhi, they captured Delhi from Najib-ud-Dawla. And then they took a fateful decision of entering the Punjab, which was actually of no consequence to them. They had no interest in the Punjab. But one Mughal commander who was there, he told them that please come into Punjab. So they entered the Punjab. They crossed all the 5 rivers. They came to Lahore. Lahore was captured in the early 1758. And there is a description that the chief of that time, Raghunath Rao, the Maratha chief who captured Lahore, in the Shalimar Gardens, he was feted with rose water was sprinkled on him and so on. And further parties were sent, and 3 more cities, Multan, Attock across the river Sindhu, and Peshawar, all these were also captured. And these 4 cities, which are today in Pakistan, were actually under Maratha control for almost 18 months. I don't know if I have the time, but there is a letter at that time which the Shah of Iran wrote to Raghunath Rao on the 4th of May 1758, where he says that between you and me, let us crush Abdali. Then I will take Kandahar and you take Kabul. So Raghunath Rao from Lahore writes to his brother, who was the Peshwa. He said, but I say, why should we give Kandahar to the Iranians? It was part of India till Shah Jahan's time. So let us not settle for half of Afghanistan. We must take all of it. Of course, that never really happened because Abdali was mired in internal troubles at that time. He came out of that, and Raghunath Rao was called back. Some other commander was sent there, and he was told that you must now, 1758-59, now you must go to Bengal, because Nana Sahib Peshwa always had his eye on Bengal. But before Dattaji Shindea, who was the head at that time, before he could go to Bengal, the Rohillas and Najib-ud-Dawla sent frantic calls to Ahmad Shah Abdali that please come and help us, because the Marathas have come supreme here. We have become second-class citizens in our own country, and please come and help us. And in 1759, October, November, you find Abdali coming back, and that actually leads to the Battle of Panipat. 3 dates, 14th, 15th and 16th January 1761, are very important in the 18th century and in generally in Indian history. On the 14th of January, Abdali and the Marathas cancelled each other out. The Marathas lost the battle, but they lost control. North India was devoid of any power. It became a vacuum. On the 15th of January, the absentee Mughal king, who was Shah Alam II, was actually somewhere in Bihar on the river Son, and he decided, I'm going to fight with the English and take back Bengal from them. Very tall ambition. And he was defeated on the river Son, and he became a refugee with the English a few months after that. And 16th of January 1761 was the day when the English defeated the French here and took Pondicherry. So 14th, the 2 main adversaries of the north, Abdali and the Marathas, cancelled each other out. 15th, the Mughal king was defeated in Bihar, and 16th January, the French were defeated in Pondicherry. These were the 3 crucial dates when actually the British established their power in India. After 1761, and this of course the map of Pondicherry of those days, you can see the star-shaped fort which no longer exists, and the square above that is a white town. So, 1761, the Marathas were licking their wounds. They had been pushed south to the river Chambal, and they were under attack by everybody. The Nizam was attacking them, Shuja-ud-Dawla Awadh was attacking them, the Rajputs were attacking them, and they could barely preserve what they had left. And to add to that, there was a division within their family. The new Peshwa, 16-year-old Madhav Rao, and his uncle, Raghunath Rao, who had led the armies to Attock and Peshawar, Raghunath Rao wanted to take the entire power in his own hands, and there was a faction at the top, and the entire Darbar split into 2 parts. For the first 2 years, Madhav Rao ceded ground, allowed him to be the regent, and in 1763, Madhav Rao took back power in his hand, and the dispute between these two continued for a fairly long time, until finally in 1768, Madhav Rao locked up his uncle in the palace prison. Meanwhile, what was happening in the north? Shuja-ud-Dawla had his army largely intact. He was the largest and most strong power in the north at that time. Shah Alam had come back after getting defeated by the English ones. These two decided to combine and again go and attack the British, try to capture Bengal. And they decided to take another expedition to fight with the English. Now Shuja-ud-Dawla with his large army actually could have defeated the English at that time. The English came up to Buxar, just across the border from UP. And it was once again, I remind you, it was led by an officer named Hector Munro, a Scotsman, who was again on deputation from the British Army. At no stage did the East India Company win battles on their own. Every time the British Army and the British soldiery was fighting for them. So Hector Munro, Colonel Champion, these were the people who fought the Battle of Buxar. Shuja-ud-Dawla was almost winning the battle. His army had encircled one half of the English army. And the people from his army who went behind the English army, they spent their time stealing the English baggage instead of kind of attacking the English force in the middle. That gave them the chance to attack the right wing from the right side and defeat Shuja-ud-Dawla. And the first sign of defeat, Nawab Shuja-ud-Dawla Sahab ran away from there, crossed one Nala over there and went on to the other side, leaving all his guns on the spot. So this was the Battle of Buxar. And that battle actually was far more important than the Battle of Plassey. And on the right, what you see here is the original map of the Battle of Buxar as drawn at that time. The original lies in the thick parchment paper in London right now. And this map which you see is a kind of a map which is shown of what? The green part which you see in the center is the part of the Marathas, what they were holding at that time. And the red part on the east, of course, is the English holding. So then these are the two characters, Shuja-ud-Dawla and Shah Alam II, who actually lost the Battle of Buxar. And the Marathas, of course, were far away, preoccupied with their own problems. And therefore, that was a time when the British rushed into that North Indian vacuum. They captured Banaras at that time and they never let it go. They took Prayag, they took the fort of Chunar, which is not far from Varanasi, and they kept it with them after that. So this debacle at the north actually allowed the English to come into the North Indian plains. So 1761 to 1776 was a crucial time. Panipat had been lost. Madharo assumed full powers in 1763. He led 4 campaigns against Hyder Ali. Hyder Ali had been completely defeated in 1760. In fact, he was begging for terms. When the news of Panipat came and the Maratha army was hastily withdrawn and Hyder Ali got a renewed lease of life, and Madharo led 4 campaigns against Hyder Ali. Each time he got a tribute of about 32 lakh rupees per campaign. In 1770, when the last campaign was fought against Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, just on the outskirts of Seringapatam, in a place called Melukute, also called Thenur Lake, you find that Hyder and Tipu were so in such a bad shape that they disguised themselves as beggars and ran away from the battlefield into the strong fort of Seringapatam. So that was. And Madhavrao in 1769 sent an army and captured Delhi, which had been lost after Panipat. So 1771, Delhi comes back to the Marathas. And not only that, Mahaji Shinde was one of the 4 commanders who took Delhi. He invites Shah Alam II, who was the Mughal king, back to Delhi, puts him on the throne, takes an undertaking from him that he will give so much territory, so many tributes every year, and so on and so forth. So that's how the Marathas came back. Now, unfortunately, at the age of 27 and a half, this young Peshwa, Madhavrao, he dies of tuberculosis. Grand Duff has made a comment that the plains of Panipat were not as fatal to the Maratha fortunes as the early death of this excellent prince. This is what he quotes as the death of Madhavrao, and that actually ends the main Peshwa. After that, the people who became the rulers of the Maratha kingdom were actually councillors, and because his brother, who took over after that, was assassinated 9 months back, where his uncle was instrumental in that affair. Now, that's the central picture which shows the assassination. On the right-hand side, you have a man. The Industrial Revolution was in full flow in England from 1760, 1770 onwards. And the first machine tool ever fabricated at that time was a boring machine. This boring machine was used in James Watt's steam engine. And the boring machine was also used to have a smooth caliber in cannons. Before that, cannons used to burst while firing because they were irregular. The cannon balls were not of regular shape. This boring machine of John Wilkinson's sword, we all know. So the beginning was in 1774 when the boring machine was first created, and the Industrial Revolution actually really took off after that. And superior weapons, superior machine tools available with them. The first lathe was created in England at that time. So all these things happened simultaneously when we were still in a very, very feudal era, when these people had already entered an era of Industrial Revolution. So this happened, 1773, Narayana was assassinated, and they were still bickering amongst themselves, the Marathas, after this. And Raghunath Rao, the uncle, he went and joined the English, and the first Anglo-Maratha War actually began at that time. So factions, fallen morals, selling yourself to the highest bidder, these things happened with the Marathas, who were that time the paramount power in India. There's a letter written by an English governor of Bombay called William Hornby to Warren Hastings, who was the Governor General in Calcutta. And it talks of four main Maratha leaders, Moroba Phadnis, Sakharam Pandit, Bachaba Purandare and Tukoji Holkar, have entered into an alliance to bringing Raghunath Rao into the government of Pune. Raghunath Rao was that time in alliance with the English at Surat and in Bombay. So that is the way there were defections going on. The national feeling was missing. The English sent an army to attack Pune with Raghunath Rao in 1779. Just 20 miles from Pune they were defeated. And Raghunath Rao was handed over to Marathas. The matters would have ended there, but he escaped. Went back to Surat in the Second Anglo-Maratha War, continued after that. 1780 actually, the Grand Alliance was formed between Tipu, Hyder Ali, the Nizam and the Marathas with the sole aim of driving the English out of India. So Mahaji Shinde was fighting in the north, Hyder Ali was fighting near Madras, and the Marathas from Pune were fighting in the Karnataka region. This lasted for 2 years. Gwalior fort was taken by the English in 1780, and Gohad's Rana in Madhya Pradesh, he was the man who was fighting against in favor of the English. So you find many Indian rulers were actually helping the English at that time. 1782, finally Warren Hastings was tired of war, Mahaji Shinde was tired of war, and finally they had a treaty by which the two sides called a halt to their findings. Warren Hastings went back to England, and that was the end of the first Anglo-Maratha War. So now the Council of Ministers were headed by Nana Fadnis and by Council of Ministers was headed by Nana Fadnis at Pune and Mahaji Scindia in the north. They were friends. At the same time, they were also rivals because both were after power. So this was going on at that time when Mahaji was declared the Wakil-e-Mutallaq by the king of Delhi, Shah Alam II. The highest post in the Mughal emperor after the king was the Wakil-e-Mutallaq. And not only that, in the Timurid, so-called Timurid Empire, cow slaughter was banned for the first time because Mahaji insisted on it. In 1792, Mahaji comes to Pune. The Holkar and Scindias have been opposed to each other for fairly long by that time. 1793, they have a battle at Laswari at Rajasthan. Holkar is defeated. In the Deccan, after the end of the first Anglo-Maratha War, Tipu Sultan is attacking both the Marathas as well as the English. And the French try to help Tipu. And Nana Fadnis tries to maintain his position. He is weak. The English in the north have already occupied Awadh. They are strong in Bengal and in Madras. Bihar is with them. In the south, finally they both realize that Tipu can only be controlled if they both form an alliance with each other. And the Marathas, the Nizam and the English form an alliance against Tipu Sultan in 1790 called the Triple Alliance. And they go and attack Tipu Sultan to Srirangapatnam. Lord Cornwallis leads the English forces and Tipu is defeated in Srirangapatnam. He has to give his sons in hostage and his territory is truncated to a little area around Mysore and the three allies take away most of his territory. He is told not to fight back and not to take help from the French, which he does not accept. And soon when he starts taking help from the French, another campaign is planned by the English against him. Now, meanwhile, Mahaji Shinde has died in Pune in 1794. His adopted son, Daulat Rao, at the age of 15, becomes the master of huge Scindia territories, a huge Scindia army. The Maratha Peshwa falls off the terrace of his house and dies in 1795. He has no son. Now, there are various factions here. There is Scindias, there is a Nana Fadnis, there is the Holkars, and they are all jockeying with each other to nominate the next man as the Peshwa, the Prime Minister. So there is chaos in Maratha ranks during this time. Nana Fadnis is even imprisoned by Daulat Rao Scindia for 6 months in 1798. All his treasure is looted away at that time. Pune is looted by everybody who comes in power there. And the English advance during this time is inexorable. In 1799, you find that there's a battle here led by the English. The English call the Marathas as their allies to help them. Marathas are unable to send an army because they are fighting amongst themselves. 4th of May 1799, Tipu is killed and Marathas are shocked. Because in 1792, they had told Lord Cornwallis that do not completely destroy Tipu Sultan, keep a small territory with him, but make him completely innocuous. In 1799, they are not there. The English attack him and he is completely killed. David Baird, he was the Major General who actually found Tipu's body, which you can see in this picture on the top. And that man actually had been imprisoned in Srirangapatnam for 4 years earlier by Tipu Sultan. So he was the man who took this, who avenged his imprisonment at that time. The Second Anglo-Maratha War, frankly, was the loss of independence, and actually 1803 should be counted from the time when everybody submitted to the subsidiary treaty. Bajirao II Peshwa was a man without money, without an army. Daulat Rao Scindia had an army, but he was not mature enough to understand the compulsions of the day. Lord Lake in the north, he issued the proclamation, French commanders in the Scindia army, and they were told that if you do not resign your posts and come to us before 30th of August 1803, you will be considered as at war with England. The French commanders had a problem. They had gained a lot of wealth during the time in India, and the only places that wealth could go back to Europe was either through Bombay or Calcutta. So sorely dependent on the East India Company. And the CNC of the Scindia forces, a man named Perron, he actually signed the release of all these French commanders. 5 battles took place between the English and the Scindia's forces. First one was Aligarh, which was under the Scindia army. The Marathas chiefs there actually locked up the French troops, French commanders, so they were allowed to fight because they wanted to surrender. The second one was battle was at Delhi. In fact, if you go to the Noida golf course, there's a big memorial there, which describes the battle between the English and the Maratha forces led by French generals. Delhi fell after that. Again, our third battle took place in Laswari in Rajasthan, where again Scindia was defeated. And the fourth battle took place at Agra, where again Scindia's army was defeated. In the south, you find Wellesley, Arthur Wellesley, who later became the Duke of Wellington. He comes and attacks, has a battle at Asai. And that was a very stiff battle, because at the end of his days, when Wellington was asked which was the toughest battle that you fought after having defeated Napoleon, he said it in one word, Asai. It was a near run thing. So these 5 battles finished the power of the Scindias. Scindias and Holkars did not fight unitedly against the English. 2 years later, Holkar was defeated. Gaikwad did not fight at all. So that was his fate, and all these people had to finally sign the subsidiary treaty and accept the hegemony of the English. And the only thing was the final act which was left to be completed as a formality was on the 5th of November 1817, when the Peshwa at Pune decided, I have had enough of insults from Elphinstone, who was the resident there, and decided to start a third Anglo-Maratha war. The Battle of Khadki was fought on 5th of November, which he lost. Now, this particular painting is a very interesting painting. This is right now in the British Library in London, but this was once upon a time in the British Foreign Office, because the English considered that this painting drawn by an English artist from behind British lines was the beginning of the British Empire in India. And because it's after this war, the Third Anglo-Maratha War, that they actually managed to become the rulers of the entire country, barring the Sikhs who are beyond the Sutlej. So that is the story of how the British actually took over India. And you can see that feudalism, lack of national spirit, disunity amongst ourselves, the English being of a corporate nature, they had people appointed. You must also take into account that people who have traveled 7,000 miles to come here from their homeland are made of a different metal than what people over here who have never traveled outside their homeland. And their kind of appreciation of the situation was vastly different from what the local rulers understood of the situation. So this is a sad story of how India was defeated, how India was captured, and eventually by the time we got our act together, it was a long time. But I think this story has to be told, and it has to be understood for lessons for the present, because today again we should not be thinking and fighting amongst ourselves, because that is an open invitation to a foreign power to come and take charge of us in some form or the other. Thanks a lot, and thanks for inviting me here and for a patient hearing. Okay.
Thank you so much, Udayji. This is a huge gap in my head that I actually requested you to fill, and now all my students also will use it. What I wanted you to touch upon, because we also teach European history along with Indian history, we do parallel timelines. One of the fates of Indian kingdom was linked intrinsically to the fate of European powers fighting among themselves. Can you just touch upon that?
Yeah, you find that when the English and the French fought in Europe, the battles were also simultaneously taking place here. And though the local rulers prohibited them from fighting, they continued fighting nevertheless. Pondicherry was taken by the British in 1761. By a treaty in 1763, it was in Canada. It was decided that Pondicherry will be handed back to to the French. That's how they got back Pondicherry. Though they lost it one more time, it was handed back another time. So that was the effect of European wars, and basically their wars were trade wars. Until 1789, 1792, when the French Revolution actually played out its course in 3 years' time, you find that the French and English were really rivals for world domination as well as for trade. So whatever happened abroad, the battles spilled over into the Indian territory, and that's why you find Anglo-French rivalry coming here and starting in this very region. So,
hello, fascinating hear it. It was like hearing an action movie from the first to end. Lots of fighting. It's not related to directly to your this thing, but since you come from the armed forces, I just want to know, how do they all manage
I'm a doctor.
Okay. How do they all manage the logistics of moving so many troops back and forth, the vast swathes of India over several months, feeding so many soldiers, their hygiene, keeping their morale up must have been a challenge. How do you think all these
Actually,
kings
every
managed
army
it?
used to carry 20,000 bullocks. So those bullocks were meant for not only towing the guns, but for carrying the granary. They lived off the land most of the time. So local people had to pay their tributes, had to pay the army. There are letters which say that please don't allow the army to pass through our territory because our crops will get destroyed. So the huge logistical challenges. In fact, I have just recently written a 10,000 word article which may be published next year on the logistics and strategy of the Marathas in the 18th century. So I think that might come out in a companion volume of American University.
My question to you is, along with the wars and trade wars, when did the conversion start to Christianity?
That was much earlier. In the Inquisition, the Portuguese came here in 1497.
No, from not just the Portuguese, but the English.
That was well after 1818. They did not do that as long as there was a rival power here standing against them. It was only after 1818 that missionaries, of course, missionaries came from every nation. There were Danish missionaries, there were English missionaries, Portuguese missionaries. So every country worth its name wanted to do that. That was the age, and that was the most important thing for those people. And of course, some people were interested in trade. But English did not do that till fairly late. Even today, you find most of the cities, the largest and the best areas are occupied by some kind of convent or some kind, because those lands were given during the British era and they still continue to be with them.
Namaste, sir. It was wonderful listening to you. Sir, several historical sources claim that Marathas attacked on the Sringeri temple, although it was Pindaris who attacked on it. So what really happened in 1791? I just wanted to have a clarification regarding
It was
that.
not only Sringeri, many other temples have been described and mutts have been described because there are two reasons for this. One is the Maratha commanders themselves were not involved in this. Like Sringeri attack, for example, was carried out by Lamans and Pindaris. Lamans and every army, whether it's Tipu's army at Bayats, the Marathas at Pindaris, every army at that time had a scavenging force, which was called the Pindaris. After defeating an enemy, these Pindaris actually paid the chief money to be given the privilege of looting the enemy camp. So these people were beyond discipline. They did not obey any orders. So when this happened at Sringeri, the Swami was very annoyed about it, and letters flew to Pune that Raghunath Rao Patwardhan's army, he was actually north of the Tungabhadra when this event took place. And he had far away from Sringeri, but his Pindaris went and did that. The Swami's elephant has been looted. When Nana Fadnis heard of this, the Swami went on a fast. Nana Fadnis wrote a letter that immediate reparations must be made. Whatever has been looted must be returned to him. Of course, much of the things which were looted were not given back. But I would say that this is not a thing which, because the Marathas were definitely their motto was Hindu Pat Patshahi. They at every stage protected the indigenous community. So it was not a matter of policy or practice. These are more of aberrations in the midst of war. And the second thing is that because they knew that the Maratha chiefs are Hindus, sometimes Brahmins, these places will not be attacked. So many rich people in that area used to keep their treasure with the mutts or the temples. And the Pindaris knew that. So they took the opportunity to kind of enrich themselves with this kind of a... That is the only logical explanation. No defense for things of this sort happening.
Good evening, sir. Myself, I'm Damana Dambala from Pondicherry University. Sir, my question for you is, how far do you think the betrayal of our own people have impacted on the British colonization of India?
To a very large extent, because if you see there's a beautiful book written by Randolph Cooper. It was his PhD dissertation for Cambridge. And in that he describes how the South Asian military economy in 1802 was taken over by the English. Today you will not think twice before joining a multinational company, whether it's Hindustan Lever versus a Tata Steel. And those days the soldiers thought the same way. They got better perks, better pensions, pay on time from the English employers, and therefore they joined the English. The national feeling was missing. They did not ever imagine that this is going to eventually lead to enslaving of my own country and myself. The English bared their fangs much later. It did not happen in the first instance. And therefore the reaction came in 1857. Thank you. I think we are out of time. Thanks.